My name is Rasamandala Das. I'm an educational consultant. I follow a devotional tradition within Hinduism that believes in a personal Godhead that is both male and female. My interests are in pedagogy, philosophy of education, and ethics. I'm not going to say any more about myself. You can ask later, because I wish to move ahead quite quickly because time is tight. There are two sessions which, as part of this one 50-minute session or 55 minutes a session, Neera is kindly co-facilitating with me, or I'm with her, sorry. I'll lead the first, Neera the second. During both sessions, we're going to leave 10 minutes, or at least 10 minutes, for questions and answers. So I'll present a beautiful idea. Neera will explore it more in terms of how to teach it and any resources associated with teaching it. Okay, so three parts in this. Subject matter, the beautiful idea. Secondly, how possibly to convey that, to get it across. I won't use the word deliver. How to get it across or to bring it out. And some resources associated. Is that okay, Neera? If you do have any questions, please make a note, because I'm going to try and present this as a little bit like a TED Talk, though I am holding notes. I won't be stopping. Okay. Is that okay? Good. Let's go. I'd like to set the context. I think I'm applying some pedagogy here. Before presenting the idea, which is coming from the Hindu tradition, I'd like to actually look a little bit at our context at the moment, our current context. You can see that. I don't have to read it. I was very surprised by the French response to the Charlie Hebdo massacre. I have absolutely no sympathy for the terrorists, but what is this free speech? Do you taunt a person who you believe has an unbalanced mind? I was a bit surprised by that, actually, and I'll leave you to ponder this, but also I'm going to ask, why is it in a society that values free speech, every second day someone resigns because of a tweet? I mean, I'm just shocked by it. Are we really as open as we think we are? Secondly, ambiguous attempts to promote equality. I'm not having a stab at the French. I shouldn't do that because it's 2015 and we don't want to mention Waterloo or Richard Branner's speech. So I won't mention those. But actually, vegetarianism in French schools has been illegal for a number of years now. And there is some discussion, I'm not sure how far it's progressed, to make vegetarianism illegal in the UK. Some of you may know about this debate. All in the name of not discriminating in equality. To use some postmodern language, I mean, really, guys. I recognize that you're not all vegetarians, but I suspect that you see the ambiguity here, at least from a vegetarian viewpoint, if not from that of a cow, pig, or lamb. Equality. There's ambiguities. We're all aware of these. I will say here that Hindu texts explain that these 5 sections of society deserve particular consideration, and that one can actually test the morality of any society by how well it protects these 5 sections of society. It actually says Brahmins here, but I've put teachers. I hope you don't. I'm not going to get into discussion about caste right yet. But I put teachers in that category. Lack of personal integrity, particularly in political leadership. Also, you know, we discuss India and the corruption there, but I mean, I'm not going to mention inflated invoices and grubby, squalid and nauseous plots to get rid of the speaker in government. We're all aware of some of this. Fluid, negotiated and fragmented identities is very much a symptom of postmodernity. You're probably familiar with this. Our identities are fragmented in many ways or negotiable. I mean, I'm an Englishman with a Scottish grandfather. I supported the Royalists during my Civil War history lessons. My twin brother supported the Roundheads. I subsequently married a Greek lady who was a communist and who now cooks pizza margherita. That's the name of a queen, by the way. And offers it to an Indian god, who, by the way, was born as a lowly cowherd and became a powerful king of the fabled city of Dwarka. We're all aware of some of these fluid, negotiated identities debates, and it's also noticeable that that what were previously fixed or ascriptive terms are now negotiable. For example, as related to our sexuality and even our physical endowments. Yeah, cosmetic surgery. All these things are now negotiable. I think there's little to say about this. That book by Michael Grimmett that was mentioned is a very good read. And the best news is always several light years from Earth. Have you noticed that? How the good news on BBC is always miles away, right? Curiosity, you can see what it says. I've heard that actually the UFOs run on nitrogen. To whom is this really useful? Coming back to Hinduism, what is it? It's very diverse. We know that. There's ways of categorizing it according to focuses of worship, doctrine, specific path or practice, and other criteria. Is there anything that... Am I doing okay? Is there anything that holds it all together? That's the real question. Is there any way we can make some sense of it without stereotyping? Here's a quote. And this is from one of those Oxford University Press books, the very short introductions, which are very good on aeroplanes. I read 3 of them on my flight to New Zealand recently. It's interesting that in the Indian traditions, there hasn't been the same separation between faith and reason as we find has dogged the history of Western thought. Critical thought is valued, but most philosophers would choose perhaps to believe in a divinity rather than to assume there's not a divinity. Another quote, and this comes from Swami Vivekananda, the very essence of Hindu philosophy is that man is a spirit and has a body, and not that man is the body and may or may not have a spirit. We don't use that term in our tradition. We are that self, the real self. And this is really, I would suggest, the central concept of the Hindu tradition. Not all Hindus will believe this, but most do. That we are that real self. And I use the word self rather than soul. Atman, real self. And yet another quote, and this is being a little confrontational, because I'd like to also support us in our sentiment for inclusivity, but also a teacher also has to confront occasionally. So this one's slightly heavy. So there are 4 things here. One who thinks that the body is the self, that this is me, and it includes the mind, by the way. In Hindu traditions, we're neither the mind nor the body. This is me. My family is permanent. The land in which I'm born is sacred. I'll remind you of that wonderful Henry V speech by Richard Branagh again. Or one who goes on pilgrimage simply to take a bath. That means religion is a ritual. They're no better than an ass or a cow. Now, that isn't just a pejorative term. We could discuss that. I'm going to move over that. But this is central to Hindu thought. To summarize that verse, we identify with the body. We then identify with our family or our dynasty or whatever. We perhaps identify with our nation, which was perhaps Scotland for the time being, if I'm English. And we also identify with our specific religious tradition. Now, I'm not saying that loyalty to a particular tradition is not valued to follow a specific process. But unless that has this aspect of a transcendence, something that is above those separate traditions, then we haven't really understood the tradition usually in which we're following, I would suggest. At least the Hindu tradition. A leaflet came through my door the other day from one specific religion, it turned out, talking about our brothers and sisters. It wasn't Islam, but I was a little horrified about this. It didn't have that brothers and sisters as taught by St. Francis of Assisi, for example. That breadth that goes beyond the different religious traditions. So even that idea that I'm this body and identify with this temporary situation extends to religion as well. What are those? And what I'm going to show you some of those labels. And in some of the schools I work with, children have worked on these. Gender. You can read them yourself. I'm separating class from economic status because I think the two are different. I don't believe in trying to make, by the way, a classless society because I think we're developing a different kind of classless society based simply on economic status. I think that's the result. I think it's a bad idea. We've heard a bit about political ideology as opposed to perhaps pedagogical theory or educational theory. Religion. The children had a few more, by the way, to do with the type of clothes you wear and so on. And it's a very interesting exercise. But what about diversity? And I would say, I'm going to make a statement here, that we can only realize equality by also acknowledging diversity. And the question is, how on earth do we do that? What conceptual model have we got for actually acknowledging both equality and inclusivity and also diversity, which helps us to do that? And the Hindu tradition says there's spiritual equality, material diversity. A simple solution. We need to acknowledge both. I'm not going to discuss now Varnashram and caste, but there is some idea of accommodating diversity. So I came up with a proposition for schools. I'm moving off the subject a little bit, but I thought you might find this interesting. And this was some work I did with one of the Avanti schools, which is a Hindu faith school. And I was suggesting that all pupils should know where they excel, gifted and talented, where they need to improve, possibly some learning difficulties. But I came up with a third one because I'm worried about the diversity agenda, this differentiation agenda. And here's one I came up with, where they are weak and it just doesn't matter. If you don't have that, and I put liberation. We've got to get that in the agenda somewhere. I was made to come up before a class when I was 7 and sing. During assembly at school, I used to mime. I was thrown out of the school choir as a growler. I've accepted, although some musicians have said they could help me, that maybe music isn't my thing. But if you do have a musician in your class, forget about differential equations. It doesn't matter two hoots. Excuse me, I'm getting a little passionate here. Yeah, differentiation, what differentiation? According to Hindu thought, I'm going to come back to this because this is, I'm hoping, a beautiful idea. The self, the real self, is eternal. It's called Sat in Sanskrit. It's full of knowledge. Knowledge is within. And looking at the affective domain of learning, it's full of happiness or love. Now, I'd like to ask, how are these Hindu ideas relevant to our teaching? Because I hope they are. I hope they're not just different. And I'm going to ask a couple of questions of you. If teachers and policymakers actually saw children and young people in this way, how would our education be? And secondly, have you had experience of really having that rapport with the individual that you forget about the color of the skin or whatever it is? You see it, but because you're seeing the real person, it becomes incidental. That's my question to you to finish. I've got a few more ideas about equality. I think have we got time? Very quickly. In Hindu tradition, the divine is, I'm not having a poke of those depictions of God as an old person, or am I? God is actually supremely youthful because he's also eternal. There's another way of looking at it. The divine is both male and female. We need to celebrate the senses without becoming their slave. Go back to some of the ideas about lust and how certain religious people deal with lust and how they project problems with sexuality outside of themselves. Oh. Hinduism usually celebrates the divine in its diverse manifestations. How the divine is here. I really have difficulty with the approach where the divine is not this, not this, not this, not that, via negativa, I think it's called. The divine may also have his or her separate existence, but may also be here with us. And can we recognize the divine here, in this world, in individual people, in the environment? In the Bhagavad Gita says, when you see the ability in a person, great ability, that is the divine. And also, finally, critical thought is, in the Hindu tradition, it's required. If you look at the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4, you'll read that it is required of the student. Curiosity and critical thought are absolutely necessary. I think this idea of the real self, who's beyond all these designations, is a very important concept for education because our views on the self have a huge impact on the type of education we're going to deliver. Thank you. Over to Neera. Huh? No, I wanted you to, sorry, my mistake. I wanted you to come in. Have you got something to add?
No, I'm happy to go with building on that.
You have. Why don't we take some questions then, Neera? Yes, okay. Could I? We will do, yes.
I will just add all the resources, PowerPoints will be available on the hub, so you can just access that.
Okay. And please say if you'd like to ask Neera or myself or both of us.
I'll do a teacher presentation after, but if you've got any burning questions,
Yes.
How would you see the idea, of the self, the atma, relating to samsara?
To samsara. Well, are you asking me or Neera? Should we both ask?
you go for it. This is,
Okay, okay. Samsara is the cycle of birth and death. So we see the self as eternal, and therefore when the self dies as it must, it enters a new body. Regrettably, a lot of Hindu textbooks are a little inaccurate. They have statements such as, Hindus believe that in the next life you become a different person or even an animal. And it doesn't quite catch the essence, because it's almost coming from the idea that I'm this body, and they have a soul, and trying to explain the Hindu view. The Hindu view is that I am that self, and I possess a mind and I possess a body. And as we get old, of course, we realize that even though the body is a little older, we feel the spirit to be the same as our youth. And if we do any type of meditation, for example, we often realize that the mind is not the same as the self. Therefore, that same self is carried by the subtle body or the astral body, which includes the mind, into a new body based on two things, desires and deserts. What we desire and the karmic credits we have. Yeah, that's in a nutshell. Does that answer? Okay. Nira, do you want to add anything? Or?
Pretty much there, that the person is not the body. Well, the person is the body, if you like. In a way I try and get it into children is you mourn the person you knew, but that self has moved on. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we, yeah.
Because in some books they talk about the self-consciousness, levels of consciousness. It's interesting you say the mind is not a self. I always thought
Yeah, yeah.
No, it isn't. See, duality in Western philosophical
Yeah.
traditions has always put the mind and the soul kind of together, lumped them together. Actually, answer that first. Yeah, I'm sorry, I should repeat the question. Is there a concept of evil? Yes, there is a concept of good and evil, but it's usually framed in terms of knowledge and ignorance. Actually, when talking about ethics, we use the framework of knowledge and ignorance rather than good and evil. Good and evil can be used, but the primary kind of terms or framework used, knowledge and ignorance. Notice how religion and critical thought or philosophy come together there.
There's no Star Wars dualism.
Yes. What's the question again? Is there something called ethics? You're touching on a subject in which I'm very interested. There are some people who say actually there's no system, structured system of ethics as we know it in the West. And I'm actually, I to some degree challenge that. It's not called ethics, but I think and I'd like to write on this, I think the concept of dharma and various other concepts are actually quite a cohesive system of ethics and morality. Yeah, but that's a big subject. And at the moment, if you look at textbooks, then we say A-level textbooks, then we're looking at the different ethical frameworks from the West, such as consequentialism, divine theory, divine command theory, utilitarianism, deontology, particularly Kantian deontology, and I've done a little research on that, and I would say that probably there is some kind of system of ethics, but there's a lot of work needs to be done academically there, and some work is being done, interestingly. Yeah, yeah. There are some good books on the subject, but it's an academic area that remains to be explored. However, I do think that Eastern philosophy, even though we might consider it religious, needs more a look in, more than just a courteous look in some of these philosophical and ethical debates. It's about time we actually started to look a little more seriously about Indian ideas. Did you want to say something? Or yes.
Which I saw in some textbooks contradiction.
Yes.
I'm using at the moment one from Faith, Living Faith, which is excellent for the concept of God. And I come across the idea of heaven and hell, which I was surprised.
Heavenly realms and hell-like realms, which
Let's go.
is not heaven and hell as you would understand from Christianity, but the belief, heavenly realms and hell-like realms. So not places like in the Christian thought, but a state of being for the self. So a soul might not, I'm using soul, just as a term, but the self might not be reborn straight away. They might need to stay in a different state of consciousness. So they haven't achieved moksha, the self hasn't achieved moksha, it's not ready to be reborn. Some Hindus believe in the concept of a heavenly realm where you might watch over your children, for example, because you haven't disconnected enough to be reborn. And some believe also the lessons are not being learnt, so there's a hell-like realm where those lessons can perhaps be absorbed better. I don't know if you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, there is a concept that, I mean, there's one thing I didn't mention related to the self was this idea of empathy. And the whole idea of samsara, referring to your question, is if you don't learn empathy, you come back until you've learned that lesson. And there are various planes of existence, some which are more heavenly, some which are more hellish, yes. But it's not, none of them are eternal.
No.
Yeah.
Places that you go to there.
Yeah. In the Hindu tradition, we favor formative assessment rather than summative. Sorry to have that dig, Mark. Do you want to? About what the question is about caste?
Shall I dive in, just with coming from a...
Yeah, you coming from yours, and then
I'll come in speaking as a born and bred Hindu. For some, it is just not relevant to their lives. For others, it matters culturally. Very few, I think, especially British Hindus, would have a strong religious belief in the Varnashrama Dharma as a religious concept. That's gone, if you like, for many Hindus, it's in the UK certainly, but it's a cultural connection. So many Hindus would use their caste grouping, and I use the term caste loosely because it's just how people, the terms we understand and how people identify. But it wouldn't be the be-all and end-all. For example, intercaste marriage is very common in many Hindu circles, not in all of them. In other places, and for some Hindus, it's very, very important. And in India, it's a whole different ballgame. And there are laws against caste discrimination, but it's like racial discrimination, sexism. You can't change people's beliefs and minds and attitudes. You can have laws against them, but it's what's they're maybe brought up believing and what they absorb themselves. So it's a big area.
Yeah, I'm in a tradition where the saint who started the lineage opposed caste. Yeah. The Bhakti traditions often favoured egalitarianism. However, at the same time, I also think, as well as recognising equality, we do need to recognise diversity, and the whole idea of the Varnashram system, according to my tradition, was it enabled social mobility. And there are many stories in Hindu scriptures of people who changed. I wouldn't use the word caste because it's not quite right. Varna. They changed Varna, and there's real stories just on that, actually. So it believed in social mobility. But, I mean, it also says that we're different and we mix differently according to our values. And I'm sure all of us here, we have different view on things than if we brought in a right-wing British political group. Or perhaps an MP from Dudley, I don't know. Ex-MP from Dudley, I don't know. We may have different views. So the idea is actually we do have different values. We mix according to those. It is useful to form associations based on common interests and values. That's how I see Varnashram. And my take on it is the underlying principle is those who are the most selfless have the greatest responsibility. Therefore, the idea was that Brahmins should be selfless. And as soon as they started to make it hereditary, they've lost it. That's not a Brahminical quality. A Brahminical quality is called liberality, magnanimity, non-attachment, cleanliness, tolerance, honesty. They're all the Brahminical qualities. So as soon as actually it became tied into birth,
you lost the religious aspect. Really.
No longer. No
longer.
longer. They're not Brahmins.
Not what you're born to.
Yeah. So it really, it's old-fashioned these days. But I have problems with trying to create a classless society. I don't think it'll work. I think we'll create more of a...
People find things to differentiate over. That's the issue.
Well, it'll be based on money and not much else. I think that's the way it's going. But that's a whole discussion. But I'd say separate out caste from Varnashram. It's very difficult. You better get going.
Yes, I need to get the PowerPoint. Any more questions?
Okay, I'll take one or two more questions, if you want, before we go on to how do we use some Hindu ideas, not only to teach about Hinduism better, but actually to support some of the values that we as teachers have. Do you want this? Yes.
What do I press?
You press this to go forward and this to go back.
Thank you. Okay, hello. So I'm Neera Vyas. I'm born and bred Hindu, but also an RE teacher of 23 years experience. And I'm in secondary RE, but I've done a lot of work towards Key Stage 2 as well, professionally. So hopefully some ideas that you can use in the classroom and take away. A lot of it you will know. I feel a little bit like I'm teaching grandma to suck eggs, but I just want to make clear, be confident in your ability as teachers, and then go with just getting the specialisms. This is going to be available. I'm not going to read through everything, but really there's a lot out there now within the age of media. It's so much better than it ever was to get authentic voices. And obviously, you know, check things out, but there's a lot that you can use that will be valid in a way that textbooks don't, because they go out of date. Also, I found, I don't know, and you will maybe have found the same. I've been marking assessments recently, and there was something about formative assessment before. Sorry, I'll come closer. Right. Can you hear that? Is that okay? I've been marking assessments recently, and I found a huge number of students had actually put in information that wasn't in their notes, it wasn't in their tasks, it was just things I'd said to them. And they'd absorbed it, and you will have found the same. So don't be afraid to share your understanding with your students that way. It doesn't all have to be paper-based or activity-based. They do actually like the old-fashioned, tell me what you know. You will be familiar with these sites, but there is a lot of good information there. So use it. I've put some topics up. On the topic of inclusivity, for example, the whole idea of God, and Rasa Mandala's talked a lot about this, in everything. And that is a foreign concept to many in some ways, but it's there. There's so much you can use to get these ideas across. I've put the festival of Navratri because it's a big Hindu festival in the UK where everybody is welcome, and that's the inclusivity aspect, as well as the fact that it celebrates the female form of God. So it's getting a few things across, and it's something you could engage with. I've gone too far ahead. Maybe not. Okay, there. YouTube has got lots and lots of things. There's a really interesting thing called What's Your Choice? It's an Indian ethical debate program. And they're normally about 20 minutes, and they have some really interesting topics. It depends what key stage you are, obviously, but for especially key stage 4 and 5, there's some really good stuff that you get real voices, you get practicing Hindu speaking, and people from other faiths in India, but getting those issues down with real examples. And do forgive me, I'm struggling with the ends of a cold. There's also some beautiful work. The film called Ganges or Ganga, just to show, again, God in everything, through the river, through the sacred Himalayas, but then also Hindu practice festivals where people, for example, light divas and place them in the water. So you've got lots going on through one clip that you can use in different ways. And it's about exploring and being confident in that. We mentioned Swami Vivekananda, and I don't know if this is going to work. I'm going to try it, but it's probably not. I did have an embedded clip of some of his quotes. Looking at time, you can access that yourselves. But being aware, again, as a teacher, literacy is being pushed at us. This is the kind of thing you could do to unpack quotes, compare text and scripture, compare quotes from other Hindus. You could use Gandhiji and some other famous Hindus, and that you've got your literacy going on, but you're also looking at aspects from Hinduism that are about the inclusivity, the spread of beliefs and different values. Gandhiji, for example, massive on ahimsa. Not all Hindus follow that tradition by any means. So you've got those comparisons going on. Current affairs, local news, use it as much as you can. And there's some very interesting issues going on. On the site, I will add, I've got an article about a big issue a couple of years ago where Hindu images were used by an Australian fashion designer, and she was making bikinis. And there was a big uproar about this. Although it's perfectly acceptable to have images of deities on clothing, people felt this was a step too far. But not all Hindus shared that view. And this is the whole thing about, you know, the idea of Hindu supremacy politically disturbs us both massively. But it is a reality. So, within that inclusivity issue, all paths lead to God is our interpretation of Hinduism. It's one many share, but there are others who see it differently. And especially, again, at Key Stage 4, but even at Key Stage 2 for students and 3, to understand everyone doesn't think the same. You know, this is the biggest flaw, I think, in any textbook. If it says Hindus do this and they do that, no. Everybody does things differently. And there are some news stories that keep going round. Yoga is a great example. A lot of non-Hindus practice it. Some Hindus have an issue with that because they feel they're not doing it properly in justice and taking in the Vedic roots. Some non-Hindus have an issue with that because they feel it's taking away, for example, there was an issue about yoga classes being allowed at a church hall. The actual vicar had been quite happy, but some of his parishioners complained because they didn't think it was right, because it was a pagan religion and it wasn't right that it was going on in their church halls. You've got all these community issues coming up, and they're not just about inclusivity in Hinduism. The beautiful idea is inclusivity as humans and through all practice and belief systems. Having a go. How many have actually done a puja service or done something in the classroom and gone for it? Nobody's raising any hands. Maybe some of you have had a go. Brilliant. It's okay. There are Hindus who'll come to you and say, no, you mustn't do that. Only somebody who's... both of us, totally. It's fine. If your intention is good, if your intention is to educate, have a go. There's no harm. If God is all-loving and everywhere, it's fine. We certainly see it that way. And if students wish to, allow them to engage. Explain it's not going to make you Hindu if you take part in this. You're just having a go. Some will be hesitant, some will really be dying to get in there. And you can, telling stories, having dance performances, having festival celebrations. It's fine. It's not seen as you are offending the faith. There will be people who will take umbrage because there are people whose character is to do that. But speaking, we would say scripturally, it's not an issue. So that learning through living for children in particular, especially Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3, but even the older ones, they will remember it better. Obviously, the kinesthetic lessons where they've seen the sights and smelt the incense and had that experience of the divine in a different way, maybe. I don't know how many of you have tried doing maybe some light meditation work. And again, that opens up their minds, not just to an understanding of Hinduism, but also just to an understanding of themselves as a spiritual being, possibly, where especially, where I teach, it's a largely secular society, it's getting through to them that there is more to you than the mind and the body. Not forcing that belief, but just opening their awareness. So there are things that could be done there. Celebrate festivals, combine. This is the inclusivity. This is my daughter, and as it happened, Diwali fell on Halloween that year. So my friends hosted a joint Diwali Halloween party, and they are from a quite evangelical Christian background, but they were open to doing that. And she had the combination of the spider's webs and the witch's hats and some of her Hindu costume too. And again, in the classrooms, and I don't know what the mix is here for secondary, primary, etc., but these are things that could be done. And it's opening that up. Hindus, a lot of Christian students sort of say to me, oh, do you celebrate Christmas? Yes, we celebrate everything. Life is to be celebrated. So go with it. And, there shouldn't be a fear. If there are people who do complain, they're not getting it because there's no reason to, especially if you're educating. Some people, meditation might be a little bit hesitant. How do you work it? But there are a lot of resources out there that will lead it for you. You literally will just have to press the button. Again, YouTube has quite a lot. And there are plenty that are not very religious, but they give that person a sense of stop, think, look at the world. And obviously allow them a choice. They have to be quiet. They have to maybe close their eyes. I say to them, you have to be close your eyes, you have to be still, you have to be silent. You don't have to engage at all if you don't want to. So we're allowing people their own individuality. And there's examples, little things you can do. Concentrate on the flower, contemplate each petal. Really works also just generally in any lesson to calm them and get them focused. But then that whole concept of God is in every single petal, that Hindu belief coming through that way. Similarly, placing themselves somewhere else, using all their senses, extending their faculties in a way perhaps they don't in normal lessons. And we've put this up, you can access it. Some resources, I mean, RE Today are fabulous and you'll know them. Rasa Mandala has some of his resources here that are available today. And there are obviously lots, and there'll be things you are happy with, but these are ones we'd recommend. Some in Key Stage 3. There's always going to be things that people find easy or less easy to use. The tasks and lesson plans I've tried to produce for the ones I've written, I hope work well from a Hindu angle and speaking as a teacher. And, if you want to speak to me about any of that later, do come and find me. Quite a few resources there. Same with Key Stage 4. And obviously it depends on the syllabus you're doing. So that's always a changing system, and they change all the time. But those are there currently. And for you, to build your own interest, Kate was on about the kind of heavy reading she likes, don't know what you like. These are quite light reading, but they're pretty interesting. Rasa Mandala's two at the bottom are a little heavier, but they're fascinating. And the other two are very easy to dip into to get a flavour of faith from inside us. So just to give you that confidence if you want to. And also just to say the bottom ones there could be used with Key Stage 4 students too. There's up there. I've got my email up there. I didn't put yours up without asking first, but it's available. You know yourselves, you've probably already done this. But do be, and be cheeky. Can I come along to your local Diwali celebration? Would you come in and share some ideas with us? Go for it, because you've got the resources. Where I live, there's nothing. But if you've got it, make the most of it. And that's it. Any questions? Yeah. I don't want you to go to tea and coffee on time. So, are there any questions or for Rasa Mandala? Yes.
So, we have very limited time in schools to teach Hindu, and there's quite a lot to teach about.
So, what is recommended for a Key Stage 3 scheme of work with limited time resources? You're largely going to be guided by your syllabus set by SACRE is my first answer, because you do have to cover what they're asking. Within that, I would say do more about the understanding than the practice, unless you feel you have to go, because the practice will vary and it's not the important thing in a way. So it's harder, but try to get into the concepts. I don't know if that gives you enough to sort of, because there's so much. Yes. Good point to raise about the, if you like, discrepancy between an actual act of worship and a method of demonstrating what happens. But within Hindu culture too, and the way I describe it to children is quite often people have a home shrine. So the items there would be the sacred items. But then around the home, they will quite often also have other imagery, items, clothing that is connected to the divine, but isn't sacred in the same way. So those are the ones, as a child, I had some murti, which are the images of the gods and goddesses. Some were in the shrine, which were respected. Others I could play with. And it depends on the culture you come from as well, and the families you come from, because everything varies. But so some are okay to be handled, if you like. But the dressing up, is seen as a way of saying it's a compliment to say we're trying to be this, not in a way of emulating it, but in a way of trying to understand it. So it's what you're saying about getting across that this is an aid rather than an actuality. Yes. Yes. Yes, absolutely. But and getting across, yes, and the thing isn't the important. It's the intention that's the important thing. That's the key issue. So the rituals aid a person who wants to show their devotion in a certain way, but equally many Hindus show their devotion through how they live. They have no ritual in their worship because they don't need it. The connections with the divine can be any way you want them to be. There isn't a set pattern. And so they can be there, but they don't have to be there. And you're right that step to understanding the greater idea. Yes. Speaking from a Hindu perspective, because different faiths have different value on the actual objects and the ritual associated, I would say and always for some Hindus, these objects represent these things. For example, in the puja, all the elements are represented through what is done. So if you have got a diva flame, for example, you've got the fire, the thing to get across is this is representing fire, which we need for life, I would say. Is that answer your question? Yeah, there's so much involved, and I'm struggling to hear. Anyone else got any questions for either of us? We've got 5 minutes. There is if you like, a conflict, a dichotomy, that there's a himsa, which is what we hear a lot about in a lot of textbooks, and there is also the directive to Arjun in the Bhagavad Gita that it is his dharma to protect his people. And that is where we get varna. The true varna is the role you have in your life, and you have, in a way, have chosen. In Arjun's case, and this is where a lot of Hindus today would take this teaching from, his was to protect his people. He was a kshatriya. So Krishna says to him, you must protect the people, and if that involves killing them, that's what you must do. Because it's not for gain. It's very important, it's not for gain, it is to protect it, to do his duty. And in fact, if you don't do this, then that is bad karma. But equally, he then talks about you are killing the body, not the self. The self will be reborn. So yes, these are because in the battle they are fighting family and there's cousins and uncles and all sorts. The body is all that you are destroying. The self will continue anyway, so it links to that issue as well. I'm going to let Rasa Mandala go into the depth.
It's a very relevant one. I think there was a very clear... One thing that's interesting, I find, from the ethics perspective, is not only are there common virtues, but there are also specific virtues that are actually allocated to the different varnas. And the Kshatriyas, or the governing class, has to use violence because it's required at some stage, whereas the Brahmins could never use it. And I mean, it's illustrated with one famous saying by Chanakya. I don't know if you know Chanakya Pandit. He's well known for his kind of common wisdom. He says there are 4 people who perish very quickly. A shy prostitute, an immodest housewife. It's quite a traditional view, of course, but anyway, they're opposites. And then he says a contented Kshatriya, or someone in the governing class, if he's contented, he will perish very quickly, and a discontented Brahmin. So he's actually showing there, through that rather vivid example, that there are different virtues for different varnas, as well as there being common desirable virtues as well. I find that a very interesting idea, actually, that one thing may be needed in one particular, I'm going to use the word service, because one should see Dharma as service rather than a job. Different values may be required for different people, or may be admirable in their spiritual progression. And one thing that's very noticeable about the Hindu tradition is its idea of concession. We've got a goal, but actually we have to understand the steps along that. And in my own tradition, the goal is love of God, and there are 9 objectives from Shraddha, which is, the word is faith, it's not quite the right translation, and love of God is the 9th. So there is a whole actually educational framework for one's spiritual progression with not only an aim, but I would call them objectives. And there is this idea that actually, in the 12th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, you probably know, Krishna says, if you can do that, if you can love me with all your heart, that's the best. But if you can't do this, then do something else. Try to work with me. Try to engage in meditation on me. And he gives a whole load of concessions. And I think it's important to keep that idea of almost concession in there. For example, to say that all Hindus are vegetarian is wrong. I'd say more are not vegetarian now. But you will find that many of those who are not vegetarian will actually fast on festival days, kind of giving an idea that that is more desirable for many.
If I just dive in very quickly on a student level, it's that connection to identity. So Hindu identity is that starting point for some, and then real love for God. Not everybody has. They connect to the faith, but that real end point.
Yeah.
Very quickly, this textbook, those 2 issues. Because that was like, yes, it is an issue. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I say, I think we'll try and get some material sent to you to consolidate this a little bit. I've got some teaching ideas. I've got a little bit on theory. Got some teaching ideas and some lists of resources. We've got all of those 3. Some of the ideas, some of the teaching ideas, and then the resources. So it was very noisy here, and it was a bit distracting. And I was aware I was rushing, and excuse me, but thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.